Hi, everyone. So, I am going to be recording myself reading chapters 1 and 2 of Nightjohn, just in case you couldn't tune into our Google Meet this week, where I read them virtually to the students live. If you couldn't tune into that, this will be a great place for you to recap me reading the first two chapters, as well as going over some main ideas from the chapters. So, with that, I'm going to start. Remember, the book is Nightjohn by Gary Paulsen, and it is going to focus on slavery during the pre-Civil War, so before slavery was abolished. And with that, I'm going to get started. So, chapter 1. This is a story about Nightjohn. I guess in some ways it is a story about me just as much, because I am in it and I know what happened, and some of it happened to me, but it still seems to be most about him, Nightjohn. There's some to say I brought him with witchin'. Brought Nightjohn because he came to be talking to me alone, but it ain't so. I knew he was comin', but it wasn't witchin', just listening. It happened. How it came to be was that Nightjohn, he came, and it wasn't me. Wasn't nobody one or the other brought him, except maybe it was that God did it. Made Nightjohn to come. God and maybe old Clell. He wants that we should call him master, and they some do when he can hear, but we call him dog droppings and pig slop, and worse things yet when he ain't listening nor close. He ain't no master of nobody except that he's got dogs and a whip and a gun, and so can cause hurt to be on some, bad hurt. But he ain't no master for all of that. We just call him that when we have to. Keeps him from whipping on us. I'm sarny, and they be thinking I'm dumb, and maybe up to witchin' and got a stuck tongue because when I birthed, they say I came out wrong. Come out all backwards and twixt and twinst. But it ain't so that I'm dumb. I'm just quiet. And they be thinking because I don't make noise and go to twattering all the time that I be dumb. But I ain't. I just be so quiet and listen all the time that I learn things. I'm Sarnie, and the other part of my name be the same as old Waller, who wants to be master but is nothing. Nothing. I don't count the back part of my name no more than I count old Waller himself, no more than I count Spit. My mammy, she told me that my birthing mammy was sold when I was 4 years old because she was a good breeder, and Waller, he needed the money. My mammy said that my birthing mammy brought enough for 4 field hands, and that she cried when the man bought her. My mammy said that my birthing mammy stood in the back of a wagon and watched back and waved, and my mammy held me up so I could see the waving and hear her crying. But I don't remember that. All I know for a mammy is the one that raised me, old Deli, and she be the one who raises all the young. Breeders don't get to keep their own babies because they be spending all their time raising babies and now working. So when they're born, babies go to the wet nurse, and she feeds them, and then old Deli gets them, and they don't live with their birthing mammies again, even if they aren't sold off. It isn't for certain how old I am, except for the sticks. Mammy keeps a stick for each one of us, and in the summer, she cuts a notch on the stick for each of the girls, so as to know when it will come time for the troubles, and then the breeding. Waller puts a great store in the sticks and watches them like an old hawk watching the chicken pens. By the stick, I am going into the same year as all the fingers on both hands. Fold them down, then hold up the thumbs. Deli says it be 12, but I don't know numbers to count, so that doesn't mean so much to me. I don't yet have the troubles, so I'm still left to be as a child. We work around the work, but it ain't dawn to dark hard work like the field work, and it leaves me a bit of time to listen and see things. Mammy, she tells me some things to learn, and I hear some others from the field hands who come back at dark, and now and again I have to work in the flower beds below the big window on the White House. The housewomen are fond of leaving the window open and talking all their business right there. So when I'm in the flower bed below the window, I hear more things to learn. When the day is coming on dark and we are all finished eating out of the trough in the front of the quarters, I get onto the pallet in the back of the long log house with Deli and the babies, and I lays there and thinks. I thinks of all the things I have learned that day, and then I tries to add them to the things I learned the day before, and then the day before that. I've been doing that as long as I can remember, since I was almost just walking, and I remember all the parts of my life. If there is time of an evening and I haven't been worked to the bone, I can just lay there in the dark and think on all my time and remember it, except for my birthing mammy. I can't think on her at all except to wonder and wonder about her. Did she have dark skin or light? How was her voice? How did it sound? But you can't remember what isn't there, and no amount of thinking on it will make it come into my brain. It was in the flower bed that I first heard about Nightjohn. Not by name, but by happening. Chapter 2. One morning, I was below the window working in the roses. Some leaves had fallen because of the little green bugs that eat the roses, and I had to chew tobacco leaves and spit on the plants to kill the bugs. I didn't much like to chew on tobacco leaves, though some of the men favored it, and it made me sick enough to near heave my guts. I had to stop, and while I was stopped, just under the window down in the thick leaves and the soft dirt, I hears it. I swear, if Cloud doesn't stop buying hands, we won't have any money left for dresses. It was the missus talking to her sister. Her sister, being an older woman, never found a man, dried up and mean, and she hates us. The missus is named Margaret, and her sister named Aline, or something close to that. Of course, we never call them by their names, never talk to them at all. And when we talk about them in the quarters, and ain't nobody listening but quarters people, we call them same as the master. Call them dog droppings or horse crap. He went out and bought another ham, the missus said. Over $1,000. Honestly, he must think we're made of money. I didn't know counting, but I knew a little of money. Once I found a penny in the dirt by the quarters, and I went to Mammy and held it out. Hide that, she told me. That's money. Somebody see that and they'll come along and take it from you. So I figured money was something to have and keep, and I kept the penny, hid it in the dirt at the end of the quarters, and I still have it. Sometimes I take it out when there ain't anybody around and rub it on my shirt dress until it shines and shines. And I knew that there was bigger money than a penny, but I didn't know how that all worked, that bigger money, because it wasn't something I learned. So when the missus, she said about a new hand costing $1,000, all I knew was that it was more than a penny, more than many pennies, maybe more than all the pennies in the world, because they be rich, the people in the White House. Richer than God, Mammy said once. She was just mad and didn't mean it. She'd been praying and got caught at it. People in the quarters weren't supposed to pray, nor know nothing about God. Mammy, she prayed all the time in her head. Usually, she only prayed out loud late at night when there wasn't anybody to hear her. Sometimes she brought in the big cast iron kettle used for making morning food to pour in the trough for us to eat. Mammy would put the kettle in the corner of the quarters, way back in the dark corner, and put her head inside the kettle so the sound wouldn't carry, and she'd pray in a whisper. She swore they could hear like cats up to the big house, and the only way to keep safe was to pray in the kettle. I one time put my head in the kettle with her. Lord Jesus, she said, talking to the bottom of the kettle. Lord Jesus, you come be making us free someday. In your name, amen. I was small then and didn't know about being free, or even how to think about being free, or even what being free meant. So I asked her what free meant. Nothing to talk about now, she said. You'll know when you get older. But now, you just be quiet and never say you heard me praying about being free. Which I never did, even after I learned what freedom is and started praying for it my own self, even then. The people in the White House aren't richer than God. I know that. But they be rich, and they be spending a lot of money, and they brought in the new hand for $1,000, and that be Nightjohn. So, those are the first 2 chapters. My dad was so kind, and he brought me in some ice cream. I said I wanted ice cream earlier, and he must have went and got some. So, kind of quickly recap on the first 2 chapters. I have some questions here, and I'm just going to kind of go through them really quick. So, The first one says, explain why Sarni remained quiet most of the time. What did the people around her think of her silence? So, just to kind of recap on that one, that was in chapter 1. Sarni was super quiet all the time, and people thought that she had something wrong with her. She had a problem with her because she was born wrong. We don't really get a lot of detail if she looks funny or whatever. We just know that she doesn't talk, so they figured that she has something wrong with her, maybe mentally, because she came out wrong when she was born. But she doesn't. I mean, she admits that. She's just taking everything in and listening and really kind of contemplating or pondering what everyone's saying, and that helps her learn. The next question is, what was the back part of Sarni's name, and why didn't she count this? The back part was Old Weller's name, her master, and she didn't count that as part of her name because she didn't think she belonged to him. She was her own person, and that's how she felt. She didn't feel like she was his property or anything as slaves were thought to be. It says, describe why Sarni was being raised by Old Deli. And Old Deli is like her new mammy, because her mammy, typically slaves, when they're born, they're not allowed to be raised by their mammies. They have to be raised by other people on the plantation because they don't want those people to be too close to them.
Bye.
I can do it. So how did Sarni feel about Waller? How could you tell? Sarni did not like Waller, right? Waller is the master. She did not like him. She repeatedly called him dog droppings or slop or whatever, like always thinking bad names of him. And his missus as well, or the people that lived with him, the master's wife or sister or whatever, she thought of them as dog droppings and did not like them at all. The next question says, describe why Mammy kept a notch stick for each girl on the plantation. And why was this important to Waller? So this one, I mean, the sticks were for their ages. And obviously, you guys all know, once a girl reaches a certain age, she gets her period, and that's what that is for. And when she gets her period, then she can have children. And that is why Waller thinks that's so important, because once they can have children, then they become valuable to him because they can produce more slaves for his plantation. And that's what every slave owner wants, is the maximum number of slaves to help grow their plantations and get more crops, which equals more money. Right now it says, describe Sarni's work on the plantation. Right now she's kind of still treated as a child, so she just does small jobs here or there, planting in the gardens, weeding the gardens, whatever she's told to do. But it's not any major work like a field hand, because she's still treated as a child. Okay, that's pretty good for chapter 1. Let's go to chapter 2. Got some papers here. Okay, so chapter 2, why did Sarni chew tobacco leaves? They said that right at the beginning of chapter 2. I don't really remember. That one, she said the old people or the men on the plantation chewed them, and she didn't like them. I know that. Oh, she had to chew tobacco leaves to spit on the plants and kill the bugs, because the bugs ate the roses. So the tobacco, she chewed it and spit it out to help kill the bugs. So it's kind of like an insecticide in a way that tobacco was. It was killing the bugs. Why did Mrs. Waller complain to her sister? What did this tell you about her character? She's complaining about him spending so much money on the slaves and not enough money on her dresses. So really, that tells you that she's pretty self-centered or superficial. She cares more about her appearance than anything else. At least that's what how I view it. What was the reason for Mammy teaching Sarni about money? What did this also reveal about the life of a slave? So I think Mammy taught Sarni about money because she wanted her to realize that things have a value and they are considered possessions, and to be free, I mean, you had to, like, purchase your freedom, or you had to pay money for your freedom, or you had to try and escape because they were viewed as possessions rather than human beings, and I think that was part of the lesson that she was trying to teach Sarni, because she said to save that money, to hold on to it. And this revealed that because slaves weren't allowed to have money, slaves weren't allowed to keep those possessions, is that really just shows that they were treated like animals. They were treated like cattle. They couldn't have their own things. They were treated very poorly. So, why do you think the slaves weren't supposed to pray or know about God? How do you suppose the slave owners felt it would be detrimental to them the slaves were to pray or worship God? Basically, that question is talking about religion. And in some cases, when we talk about slavery, you'll know that slaves practiced their own religion. However, it was done in secret. And the reason for that was because slave owners didn't want slaves congregating in one place together because they didn't want to spark any sort of rebellion. They also didn't want them practicing a religion because it showed partly that they were educated. And remember, slaves weren't allowed to be educated either because that could lead to a rebellion. That could lead to some sort of ending to slavery, and slave owners couldn't have that. They depended on that. So they don't want slaves to be educated. They don't want them coming together. They don't want them practicing a religion because that gives them some sort of community to bond with. And they don't want that because, again, that can cause some kind of rebellion. So any of that stuff slave owners do not want. They want them having minimal contact, minimal possessions, really minimal purpose for life because they want their sole purpose to be working on that plantation. How much money did Clell Waller pay when he bought Nightjohn? And what does this tell you about Nightjohn? He paid $1,000, and $1,000 is a lot for a slave. So that tells you that he was pretty valuable. In your opinion, why do you think slaves had to eat out of a common trough? Again, a trough, remember, is something like you would put food in for animals. And if all slaves are eating out of that together, they're essentially being treated just like animals. Their slave owners didn't value them as a human being or a person. They were thought of as animals. The last question I have for you is, how was Sarni hurt by her lack of education? And this, I think, is pretty huge. I mean, she's 12 years old, guys, and she can't read. She doesn't know numbers. She doesn't know how to count. She doesn't know the value. I mean, she understands money has value, but she doesn't understand like how much $1,000 really is worth. She doesn't get it. So think about how much further behind she is than you guys are. You know all of that stuff. You can read, you can write, you know the value of money, you have possessions. Think of the differences there. She's so far behind, and she doesn't even really understand how far behind she is. That's just normal for her. So if she were to try and escape slavery and try to function in a normal society, she wouldn't be able to. And that's the reason that slavery keeps continuing over periods of time, because these slaves, they're treated like animals, treated like children, even as adults, and they can't fend for themselves in the real world because they don't know how. They were never taught. They never had that form of education. So that's why education is so crucial to help people function in a society. So those are some key points from chapters 1 and chapters 2. Chapter 1 and chapter 2, I should say. Those aren't plural. We will be focusing on these chapters this week. There's a discussion post that you need to answer, so make sure that you answer that. And I will see you next week for chapters 3 and 4.